When Bangkok authorities made it to the compound of wealthy drug dealer Apichy Ongwisit, they left retching. Nearly 300 human bones submerged in a pond, the remains of a 17-year-old girl, and another casket holding a woman's decomposing body. Heavy objects like weights and cement blocks, presumably used to sink the bodies, were also found. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the 22-year-old Kik was just one of the many victims of a potential serial killer, heir to a dark legacy of violence. The shocking revelations left the country reeling and demanding justice for those whose lives were stolen by a man who thought his wealth placed him above the law. This is the tragic story of Warinthorn Chaiyachet and all those taken by Apichy Ongwisit. Wealth, property, a lush estate on the outskirts of Bangkok. From the outside, it seemed like Apichy Ongwisit had everything anyone could ever want. But behind the fancy gates of the Ongwisit family compound was a place with a seriously dark past. Apichy's life of privilege was messed up from the jump. His dad, Charlam Ongwisit, was the filthy rich owner of a Bangkok market. But when Apichy was just a little kid back in 1983, Charlam got arrested and thrown in jail for unaliving a 12-year-old girl. The details of what went down were never really fully revealed, but word on the street was that Charlam lost it when the girl accidentally broke one of his prized possessions, a custom-made fish tank. In a rage, he allegedly beat her to death and then cut up her body to try and cover up the whole thing. Apichy's mom was in on it too, helping her husband hide the incident. But before the cops could catch her, she fled the country with Apichy's little sister, leaving 4-year-old Apichy all alone. It's hard to even imagine the kind of mental scars a childhood like that would leave. Apichy was left with no parents, and his family name was forever linked to his father's evil deeds. He was raised by distant relatives who apparently didn't show him much love. People would see young Apichy wandering the streets of Bangkok by himself, trying to navigate life with no one to guide him or have his back. It's a question that's been around forever in the world of crime studies. Are people just born bad, or do their surroundings shape them into who they become? For Apichy, it was like he got hit with a double whammy. He had the genes of a violent dad, and then he had to deal with the heavy trauma of being abandoned by his family after they did something seriously messed up. And forget the genes, Apichy's family normalized violence. Not only did they do something unthinkable, but they worked hard to hide it and escape justice. That set a horrible example for a 4-year-old. Charlam got shot and killed before he could be sentenced, so he never faced justice, nor did his wife. However, his twisted legacy stuck to the family estate like glue. The locals started calling it the House of Horrors, and looking back, they didn't know half of it. As Apichy got older and took over the family estate when he became an adult, it looked like he was living the high life, enjoying all the perks of his dad's money. He seemed to have it made with all the luxury and excess he could want. But when you looked closer, something way darker was going on behind the scenes. Because of his family's bad reputation, Apichy didn't have many legit job options. So he decided to dive into the criminal world to make his cash. He started making and selling some illegal drugs, especially mixed with caffeine, which the locals called yaba, or crazy medicine. The drug game allowed Apichy to keep living large and let him feed his growing appetite for cruelty. He was known for hanging out in Bangkok's sketchy underworld, crawling with brothels and massage parlors. There, he'd seek out vulnerable women that he could manipulate and abuse. Sure, his money let him basically buy any companion he wanted, but his possessive streak and his short fuse meant any relationship he had was bound to be toxic. He saw women as things he could control, expecting them to obey him while he did whatever he pleased. In December 2018, his violent tendencies hit a terrifying new low. High on his own product and waving a gun around, Apichy snatched a young woman off the street and tried to drag her back to his place. She barely got away with her life But because Apichai had deep pockets and connections, he was able to pay the woman around $14,000 to keep quiet and dodge any charges. He avoided facing any real consequences for what he did. Looking back, it was a disturbing sign of just how low he was capable of sinking. In this messed up story, the person who probably had it the worst was Warinthorn Chaiyachet. She was only 22, a single mom working at a hostess bar in Bangkok to support her family back home. Raised by her loving grandmother in the rural Thailand from a young age, Kik's childhood was humble, but filled with care and affection. As she grew older and started a family of her own, Kik was determined to give her children a better life. But when her marriage fell apart, she found herself in a desperate situation. With few job prospects and her family counting on her, Kik made the difficult decision to leave her small hometown and her grandmother's warm embrace behind. She moved to Bangkok, the bustling capital, where she found work in a hostess bar. It was a tough job, but Kik was willing to do whatever it took to support her kids. So when Apichai, with all of his wealth, started paying attention to Kik in early 2019, showering her with gifts and affection, she probably felt like she didn't have much of a choice but to go along with it. She started staying with him at his estate, and even though it might have started out as just a way to get by, it quickly turned into something way more toxic. By the way, Apichai's showering with attention is a classic manipulative move called love bombing. It's when someone goes way over the top with affection and generosity to make the other person feel special and get them hooked. But then, once they've earned that loyalty, they flip the script and start withholding the love. It's one of the most twisted forms of abuse a narcissist can inflict. What's even worse is that the Apichai targeted Kik specifically because he knew she was in a tough spot. He saw her vulnerability as an opportunity to exploit. It's sickening to think about how calculated his actions were, all to trap her into his web of control and violence. Love bombing is a major red flag, but when you're in a desperate situation, it can be hard to see it for what it is until it's too late. Apichai also got Kik hooked on drugs that he was making and selling. As he became more paranoid and abusive, he basically started holding her prisoner, not letting her leave the property or see any other guys. The really disturbing thing is that it seems like violence was Apichai's go-to response anytime he felt slighted or like he was losing control. In August 2019, when Kik told him she wanted to leave and to get back together with her husband, Apichai lost it. He beat her savagely with a metal bar and then stuffed her body into a casket and buried it somewhere on the estate grounds. It's hard to even imagine the kind of terror and pain she must have experienced in her final moments at the hands of someone so cruel and unhinged. And just like that, Apichai reenacted his father's murderous rage, and Kik lost it all in the blink of an eye. She never got the chance to say goodbye to her kids or her loved ones. Kik's disappearance did not go unnoticed. When she suddenly stopped contacting loved ones and Bangkok police made no progress on her missing person case, her family began to fear for the worst. It would be months before the chilling truth would be uncovered. In January 2020, acting on a tip from Charlam Ongwinsit's former security guard, who claimed to have assisted Apichai in concealing Kik's body, authorities arrived at the estate, where they would make a series of stomach-churning discoveries. Not only did they find Kik's remains stashed in a metal casket on the property, but as they began searching the grounds, a nightmarish picture emerged of a potential serial predator. Scattered in a pond on the estate, police divers found nearly 300 human bones, including those of a 17-year-old girl, along with another casket containing the decomposing body of an unidentified woman. Heavy objects like dumbbells and cement blocks used to weigh down the corpses were also recovered. Even though the gruesome finds on Apichai's property made it seem like he could be one of the worst serial killers Thailand has ever seen, the remains were in such bad shape that figuring out who most of the victims were was impossible. When it came down to it, the only death they could definitively pin on him was Kik's. But the writing was on the wall. For years and years, who knows how many vulnerable women had their lives snuffed out by a rich, entitled psychopath who thought he was untouchable. The system, with all of its screwed up biases against the poor and marginalized, especially women, let him get away with it for too long. The media couldn't get enough enough of the gory details of the crime scene, which they quickly nicknamed the Metal Casket or House of Horror murders. It sparked a huge firestorm of attention as people began to realize just how depraved Chaiyachet really was. Although he initially denied any guilt, as literal piles of bones were laid out in front of him, Chaiyachet admitted and told detectives his own version of the story. How he became paranoid about Kik seeing other men, how he kept her prisoner, and how she accidentally suffocated in the metal casket he trapped her in overnight. As messed up as that sounds, it's actually worse. Kik's autopsy revealed that she was in fact tied and beaten with a metal rod until almost all of the bones in her torso were broken. This grisly case started another conversation. Do killers like Chaiyachet just pop up out of nowhere, or are they a product of a society that let them down? Now, let's be crystal clear. There is no excusing what Chaiyachet did. No justifying the innocent lives he stole for his own sick pleasure, but it's worth taking a step back and looking at the factors that might have shaped him into the monster he became. What role did his upbringing, his family's dark legacy, and the way society turned a blind eye to the warning signs play in all of this? From an early age, Chaiyachet had been immersed in a world of violence, greed, and corruption, with seemingly no one intervening to set him on the right path. He grew up believing he was untouchable, that his wealth and status placed him above the law. And to add a disturbing degree, he was right. It speaks to an unsettling truth how many other damaged and dangerous individuals are out there, ticking time bombs failed by their circumstances and society, and how many of their victims suffer in silence, dismissed or blamed for their own fates. Nothing can ever make right the unimaginable hurt Chaiyachet caused, but his story can still serve as a wake-up call, a chance to talk about how we as a society can stop creating these kinds of monsters in the first place. Maybe it's about stepping up with better support for kids who are at risk, or getting tough on the kind of culture that turns a blind eye to violence against women. Maybe it's about making sure the justice system is fair, so that how much money you have doesn't determine how you get treated under the law. And speaking of the justice system, it needs to protect all people, including women working in the adult industry. It is a tragic reality that women who work in the adult industry, like Kik as a bar hostess, face a disproportionate risk of violence and even murder compared to people in other professions. Yet all too often, when these crimes occur, police treat them with apathy or dismissiveness. It's as if society has confined these women to a space where their vulnerability is normalized, their trauma expected and ignored. The very fact of their profession seems to make their lives less valuable in the eyes of law enforcement and the public at large. This indifference is not only deeply unjust, but it also perpetrates a cycle of violence by emboldening predators who know they can act with impunity. When we fail to take crimes against sex workers seriously, we send a message that their lives don't matter. And that is a devastating betrayal of our shared humanity. We owe it to Kik and all the other lives that were senselessly cut short to take a hard look in the mirror and figure out how we can do better. As for Chaiyachet, he finally had to face justice in January 2021. After a trial where he was found guilty of Kik's murder, the drug charges, and that earlier essay, he was sentenced to life behind bars. He just barely dodged the death penalty. There's at least some small comfort in knowing that he'll never be free to destroy another life again. He'll spend the rest of his days locked up, forced to confront the weight of his own evil actions. It's not enough, but it's something. Kik's grieving family, left to raise her children without their mother, have received some financial compensation from Chaiyachet's estate. $80,000, a paltry sum in the face of their incalculable loss. But no amount of money can fill the void left behind by a bright young woman robbed of her chance at happiness. Chaiyachet might have grown up in the shadow of his father's sins, a second generation of sociopathic cruelty carrying on a twisted legacy. But at the end of the day, the responsibility for his actions is his and his alone. He had a choice, and he chose again and again to inflict unthinkable pain. As his victims' families struggle to pick up the pieces and the people of Thailand grapple with the fallout of an unimaginable crime spree, one truly truth rings clear. Monsters aren't born, but made by a complex dance of circumstances, psychology, and personal agency. The story of Apichay Ongwinsit is a harrowing reminder of our obligations, both as individuals and as a society, to do everything in our power to foster more compassion and less cruelty in this world. The alternative is to see the House of Horrors not just as one man's lair, but a grim monument to our collective failure to protect the most vulnerable among us. Hey you guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment and tell me what cases Kik's tragic story reminds you of, and what other stories you'd like me to cover. And before you leave, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. Alright, catch you soon.
What's going to happen to you now, mate?
Well, I know it's going to happen to go to prison, obviously, but again.
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
This is Damien Bendel, a depraved killer who a few hours ago had violently murdered his pregnant girlfriend, her 3 innocent children. But he did not stop there. He actually went on to do some pretty unspeakable things to a little girl as she was dying. What would make someone do something so vile and horrific? This is the case of the little girl who was violated after her whole family was killed by her stepdad. On the Sunday morning of September 19th, 2021, the police in the town of Killamarsh, North Derbyshire, England, received a startling call from a man claiming to have killed 4 people.
Basically, I need the police and the ambulance and that because I've killed 4 people.
Okay, just hold the line. Bear with me.
As the police arrived at the address a few minutes later, they saw a man, later identified as 32-year-old Damien Bendel, standing outside a semi-detached house, calmly waiting for them. This body cam footage from one of the officers shows the moment the police approached Damien.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Alright, come to me. Mate, have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have?
No, there's no weapons or nothing.
Right.
Right, do you just want them to do your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
You have?
Have you stabbed yourself, mate?
I can see blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Just my chest, 4 inches in with a bread.
Can we have a look?
Yeah, and 1 on the stomach.
In the footage, Damien appears calm and relaxed as he casually tells 2 officers about the injuries that he had inflicted on himself. When the officers asked him to remove his coat, Damien says that he doesn't want to be in front of everyone, and so the officers take him to the side of the house where they ask him what he thinks would happen next, and his answer is startling.
See ya.
Right,
So
we told you, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know it's going to happen
just
to go to prison, obviously, but again.
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
Immediately after the confession, Damien was put into handcuffs and asked to sit on the ground outside of the house as one of the officers reported the situation on his radio.
He's been calm and compliant, but he's got some wounds to his chest. They're not oozing blood, but he's saying that his family are inside and that he believes he has murdered them. Are you alright for me to go in?
Yeah.
The officer then proceeded to enter the house, but what he found was far from what he had imagined. It was a horrific scene with gore covering every inch of the house. 4 bodies lay in different rooms in the house with their heads completely crushed with a hammer. One of the victims was 35-year-old Terry Harris, who was said to be in the early stages of pregnancy. She was lying on the floor of the main bedroom, completely covered in gore. Her 11-year-old daughter, Lacey Bennett, was lying on the bed next to her while her son, 13-year-old John Bennett, was found in the bathroom. In another bedroom, the officer found yet another body belonging to Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who had come over for a sleepover. The manner in which the 4 were killed was so brutal and vicious that even the hardened officer was left terribly shaken.
Damien, it's 07:47 hours. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention when questioned something later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
But what really happened? Terry Harris was a care worker who many described as a loving and caring mom to her 2 children, John and Lacey Bennett. After separating from her partner of 14 years, Jason Bennett, who was also the father of her children, Terry went online hoping to find love. Unfortunately, what she found was the complete opposite. When When Terry began her relationship with Damien in April of 2020, she thought that he was sweet and a gentleman, despite his rough edges. But soon she learned that she was wrong, as Damien was abusive and controlling and even tried to separate her from her family. On top of that, Damien had a lengthy criminal record, including robbery, arson, and a grievous bodily harm. At the time Damien began his relationship with Terry, he was reportedly wanted by the police for setting someone's car on fire, an offense that he was later given a suspended sentence for. People who knew him growing up said that he was always getting in trouble and wanted to emulate a relative who was considered a bad boy. He would take pleasure in torturing kittens and bragged about beating a dog to death with a brick. Still, Terry saw some good in him, despite his substance addiction and the fact that he was unemployed. He would even steal from her and sell her belongings to feed his habit. Sometimes he would force Terry to borrow money from loved ones, which he would then use to buy narcotics. At some point in September of 2020, Terry moved to the town of Killamarsh and didn't want Damien to know where she lived, but he somehow found out and moved in with her and her children. Terry's friends and family began to notice the toll that the relationship was taking on her well-being and tried talking her into leaving him, but she was completely in love. One time in January 2021, her mother even gave her an ultimatum to end the relationship, but she didn't. Instead, she told a friend that she and Damien were trying for a baby. She also told her mom that the two would get married. Before the murderous incident, Terry had just found out she was pregnant and texted her friend on September 17, 2021 saying, "We have some good news for you." She promised to call over the weekend with the good news. Little did she know that she wouldn't even be alive by then. On Saturday of September 18, 2021, Terry helped her daughter Lacey and her friend Connie put up a stand outside the house where they spent the afternoon selling sweets in order to fundraise for cancer research. This picture, which was taken on that day, would chillingly be their last. Connie's mother said that she sent a WhatsApp message to her daughter at around 9 p.m. that evening, wishing her a good night. And Connie replied immediately, wishing good night to her mother. At around 9:30 p.m., Connie's mother recalled overhearing a FaceTime conversation between her older daughter Libby and Lacey's brother John. The conversation went on until 9:42 p.m. when John said that he was going to have a shower before going to bed. After that, everything went silent in the house. According to investigators, Damien had spent the evening on the phone, calling and texting his narcotics dealer, asking for some products to sell. He left the house at around 7:40 p.m., with his phone records indicating that he was still getting high on weed and other substances. Investigators believe that Damien began the vicious attacks sometime after 9:42 p.m., going around the house with a claw hammer and savagely beating his victims to death. When he was done, this sicko then took John's Xbox to sell narcotics. He was captured on CCTV leaving the house with the Xbox in a plastic bag and getting into a cab. While on the cab, he reportedly told the driver that his night was not too bad, a bit mad. When asked what he had been up to, he reportedly replied, "Just chilling with family, really." Another footage later showed him emerging from the cab and wandering through the street without the Xbox. At around 7 a.m., he called his mom and entered a nearby shop to buy some cigarettes. CCTV footage inside the shop shows him going through the coins in his hand that appear to have traces of red. He then gives the shop assistant a warm smile before leaving and making his way back home. Later, when he was arrested, this monster reportedly told officers that he had blacked out and didn't know why he did it, saying, "The whole house is covered in claret. I used a hammer. I didn't realize what I did until I walked into my room and saw my missus and my daughter. But you don't often get 4 murders in Killamarsh, do you? Well, 5, because my missus was having a baby." Now, get this. Despite the pain and horror that he had inflicted on Terry and the 3 innocent children, Damien wanted to plead guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter under the guise of diminished responsibility. He claimed that he had sustained a brain injury some years back, which could have led him to commit the heinous crime. However, extensive neurological tests which were done on him revealed that this was not true. When he realized that his plans didn't work, Damien finally admitted to everything.
It was at the start of today's court proceedings that Damien Bendel entered guilty pleas, guilty to the murder of his partner, Terry Harris, who was in the early stages of pregnancy with their child, guilty to the murder of 11-year-old Lacey Bennett and 13-year-old John Bennett, who were Terry's children from a previous relationship, and also guilty to the murder of 11-year-old Connie Gent, who was Lacey's friend, who was staying at the home in Killamarsh in Derbyshire for a sleepover on the night that these terrible events unfolded.
Sickeningly, it was revealed that when Lacey lay dying, Damien violated her. How messed up is that? During the sentencing hearing, which happened on December 21st, 2022, the prosecution described the crime as brutal, vicious, and cruel, saying, "The circumstances are truly hideous. Terry was in the early stages of pregnancy. It appears the defendant went around the house looking for them and attacking them each in turn. These were brutal, vicious, cruel attacks on a defenseless woman and her 3 young children. The defendant attacked them using a claw hammer, which he used to hit them over the head and on the upper body. It was perfectly clear none of the victims stood a chance." Lacey's devastated father, Jason, gave a heartbreaking impact statement to the court, saying, "The murder of my 2 children has destroyed me and taken my life away. I can't kiss them and tell them I love them, and now I have nothing to fight for. I used to be scared of dying, but now I'm not scared at all. I just want the pain I feel to end. John and Lacey were innocent, and I cannot comprehend why someone would take innocent lives." Connie's dad, Charles Gent, also gave a powerful statement, saying that no sentence would ever be enough to give justice for his little girl. The man who carried out the crimes can only be described as truly evil and should never be free from incarceration, just like the families of the victims in this case will never be free from their life sentence as a result of the shocking and adherent crimes he committed on a defenseless woman and children. In the end, a judge sentenced Damien to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The level of force and violence that was carried out in these attacks was carried out with one intention, and that was to take the lives of those within the premises. They'd all, by the nature of their relationship, come to trust Bendel, and he took the opportunity to shatter that trust. These horrendous attacks and the force and the weapon used would have left persons inside the premises very quickly incapacitated.
What do you think motivated Damien to do what he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and if you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe.